We won't be recording during like the group discussion parts though.
Correct. It will just be during the large group and presentation. And thank you so much for joining us, y'all. I am so excited for this CII reunion / Afro Latinidad Intersectionalities presentation that we have going on. I appreciate you being here on time. I appreciate you supporting Miss Alma. And just a quick introduction in regards to her. Let's go ahead and give a round of applause that she made it back. And also, Ms. Alma Ramos is a previous CU Denver alum. She has her master's degree in counseling with a concentration in higher ed and student affairs. And we welcome you. Welcome during this crazy, crazy time, Alma. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Yay, thanks for having me. It's happy to, like, I can't say like I'm happy to be back because I don't feel like I'm actually back, but I'm happy to see some familiar faces, some new faces and everything. And I love working with CU Denver, especially CII. I want to thank Sweann for reaching out to me and for helping with the coordination. You've been doing like a badass job with everything, and so I commend you for that and everything that you do. If we can give like reactions, like little claps to Sweann, snaps, whatever you gotta do. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get to my PowerPoint. Y'all, I've been using Keynote on my Mac, and so like now this is starting to become like a little bit foreign to me, but I'll get through it. Okay, so we're talking about Afro-Latinidad, intersectionalities within Latinx culture. So also this slideshow was made by Sweann, so she did a fantastic job with this as well. So highlighting a lot of celebrities that are Afro-Latinidad. We have Perez, Cardi B, of course, Jarrell Jerome, which if you haven't seen When They See Us, I recommend it, but when you're in a good space mentally, it's very heavy. But it's an incredible series on Netflix. And a ton of other people on here that I want to highlight, like Celia Cruz, obviously, like, whew, everything she does. And so... So let me go ahead and get to the next slide, which is the land acknowledgement. So acknowledging that we reside in the homelands of Indigenous peoples is an important step to recognizing the history and the original stewards of these lands. The United States has worked hard to erase the narratives of Indigenous peoples. However, land acknowledgements help in reminding people about our institution's history, as well as the many contributions Native peoples have made over time. While land acknowledgements are important, they are not to be used as a current trend that universities and some nonprofits have adopted. There are protocols, and a land acknowledgement is not to be said or read just to be said or read. The intent of the acknowledgement must extend far beyond the words you speak in a moment. Land acknowledgements must be implemented throughout the practice and echoed through direct action in supporting and centering Indigenous peoples, which I love this part a lot. And so as we gather here today, we honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. This area was also the site of trade, hunting, gathering, and healing for many other Native nations, the Ute, Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, and many other Native nations. We recognize the Indigenous peoples as the original stewards of the land and all the relatives within. The animal nations, plant nations, insect nations, and stone nation. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. Let us acknowledge also the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. We respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. We pay our respect to them and give thanks to all tribal nations and the ancestors of this place. So with that, have my little intro. So I'm pretty sure most of you know me here, but my name is Alma Ramos. I'm a diversity and outreach coordinator over at the University of Colorado Boulder in their College of Music. I started that this past August. I've also been working on a lot of side projects with consulting. Aldo was actually on a team with me, which is super cool, and he was working with us. And so DEI initiatives and working with a lot of companies. I'm also an alum of the University of Colorado, Denver. I have like Suzanne said, I have my Master of Arts in Counseling with a concentration in Higher Education and Student Affairs. And the reason why I'm here is I'm Black and Mexican, Afro-Latina. So I have that background, especially growing up mainly with my Latin side of the culture, my Mexican side of my family, and even in a neighborhood for about half of my life growing up. I grew up in Aurora, Illinois, not Aurora, Colorado, Aurora, Illinois, which is about 45 minutes outside of Chicago. And it has a very high Mexican population and Puerto Rican population mainly. And so that's the culture I grew up with the most. The food, the language, even though I'm not fluent in Spanish, I'm still Afro-Latina, even though people will tell you differently. The food, the language, the dancing, the culture, the celebrations, everything like that is very prevalent in my life. So some community guidelines that we want to set here in order to facilitate this conversation, we will all agree on the following community agreements. Listen to understand. Listen engagingly within the moment, so active listening is also good. Speak thoughtfully after the moment. Be willing to do things differently. Be willing to experience discomfort, which is very important. Acknowledge the space you take. I'm an extrovert, and so I know that I can take up a lot of space. I know that I can talk a lot, especially if I'm passionate about a certain subject. And so that's something that I know that I still have to practice to this day, is making sure that I'm managing the space I take up. And also with when you all speak during the discussion part, I'll try to do my best as well to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak. And then acknowledge this, that this is a brave space rather than a safe space. So every space that someone goes into, they may not feel safe. And that's really important to understand, especially when it comes to people from marginalized backgrounds. And so we really want to highlight and encourage the bravery that comes with speaking, with being vulnerable, and being open about things. So that's why we highlight brave spaces more than safe spaces. So a little bit of an overview. We're going to do a history of slavery. It's not going to be a complete history lesson, but just kind of like a recap, so we know like how we got here, why are Afro-Latinx people here, the demographics that are of the different places in Latin America, anti-Blackness versus not being Black enough, movements, protests, rallies that are currently happening, action items, and the group panel, which is actually going to end up changing into a discussion. So I'll kind of explain that more once we get there. So as you all know, the United States has a long history of slavery. And so that's nothing new to us, most likely, but we also have to recognize that a lot of slavery went into Latin America as well. So the New World, they came to the New World to them from the 1490s to the 1850s. Spain and Portugal were some of the colonizers who brought slavery to Latin America and the Caribbean. So hence why a lot of us are Spanish speakers. Hence a lot of people, not a lot of people, but the main language in Brazil is Portuguese. Slave labor was used for crops, most notably sugar, tobacco, and rice. So a lot of people came over here and just basically took all the goods and used Black people to really, well, labor these so that they can bring them back to either their countries or sell it within their own people, and make a profit off of it, while Black people were basically unpaid laborers and not human to them. Other products of slave labor, rice, rum, coffee, indigo, which is a common dye, which that was new to me, and then mahogany wood, which is not just mahogany wood, it was a lot of other wood, but there was a high, there's a lot of mahogany wood down in Latin America, and so a lot of people use that for their furniture and like using it for dressers and beds, and was seen as like a more like high class type of thing. And so that's just something to recognize. So these two photos on the left, the top left one is in Havana, Cuba, and that was in 1850. And then the one on the bottom left is a depiction of Brazil in 1846. So just kind of showing Black laborers there again. And then the demographics. So 1 in 4 Latin Americans self-identify as Afro descendants. And even that number is tricky because there are a lot of Afro-Latinx people who do not identify with their Afro descendants part of themselves. They kind of try to stray away from that, and that's that anti-Blackness portion that we'll end up getting to. The high population of recorded Afro-Latinx are in Peru, Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, but we have to recognize that we are everywhere. Dominican Republic is a big place, and I think with like Cardi B and a lot of even baseball players coming from the Dominican who are Afro-Latinx made that aware as well. But we are everywhere, and we have come by a lot of different names. So Afro-Indigenous was common in Central America, Pardo, which is in Brazil, Moreno, which I've heard still to this day, was common in Venezuela, and that was more for mixed race people. So those who were of African descent and of Spanish descent. And then Indios, which was used in the Dominican Republic. So those are just kind of some of the names. I know that here in the United States, people who were mixed, like black and white, were called mulattoes. And so like that was a common thing with the United States. So you can see that everyone is ready to label everyone, basically. Everyone's ready to put someone in a different space and in a different ranking than actually being like just part of the culture and making sure that we know that they are different from what is accepted here. So that was an important part of this with naming everyone and seeing that there's already that eagerness to put someone in their place, especially people of African descent. And so this hit home for me a lot from being Afro-Latina, is this sense of anti-Blackness from a big part of my identity, and the sense of not being Black enough. And so this is something that is also common with people who have a mixed identity or who are multiracial and multi-ethnic, of not being seen enough of either. So the ways that anti-Blackness can show up is proving Latinx identity. This is extremely common for me, which is, in my mind, pretty crazy because my name is Alma Ramos. I don't really know like what else I need to prove to you that I am Latina, but people will be like, where's your family from in Mexico? Did you go to Mexico? Do you speak Spanish? What dishes do you make? And will ask me like just a lot of certain things that apparently all Mexican people know. So that's one way, and I'm sure people who are Afro-Latinas from another place experience the same thing. Colorism is huge, and that's, we can go all day with that one, but this like idea of being a lighter skin tone is more pure. So this is something that I definitely saw with just watching like Telemundo growing up, and all these women are like lighter skin tone on there with blonde hair. And I'm not saying that some of them are probably not naturally blonde, but I know that some of them are not. And so it's that trying to appeal to whiteness and trying to be considered this pure type of person. And the darker you are, the less pure you are. This also shows up with even who you have a relationship with and who your partner ends up being with. And if you decide to have kids, a lot of people will put pressure in being like, if you are darker skin tone, to be like, you should marry someone lighter so your kids come out lighter, which is horrible. That's so horrible. And I heard that, and I am light skinned. I am light skinned for a Black person. I am light skinned for an Afro-Latinx person. And I have heard like, you know, mija, if you just marry someone who's like a little bit lighter than you, and then your kids will be beautiful. Your kids, and that's how they get you. They'll be like, your kids will be so beautiful with this like mixture, and they'll be like a little bit lighter than you, but a little bit darker than him, or whatever it might be. And that's extremely damaging, because then you think something's wrong with your color. You think something's wrong with you and the way that you were born, that you have no control over. And so that's like a huge thing. media, things like that. I even saw something where there was like a highlight in some magazine, and I wish I remember, I posted on Instagram yesterday, but there's like some always an article that highlights powerful Latinx women for Hispanic Heritage Month. And there's only one Afro Latina that's highlighted each year, which comes off of this as this message that only one Afro Latina can be special, that only one Afro Latina can really stand out amongst the rest, and can even be considered beautiful in that sense. So that's also very damaging, especially when all the other women around her are like the lighter skin tone, more look like J-Lo and Camila Cabello and like Selena Gomez and all of them. And not to say that they aren't pretty, but I mean, there's so much more complexity, and there's so many more places in Latin America that the color variation of people's skin is from here to here. It literally looks like Rihanna's Fenty like foundation board. So I also watched her Savage Fenty show before this to hype myself up. So that's also where it's coming from. It's incredible if you haven't watched it, by the way. Another way that anti-Blackness shows up is our contributions aren't included in our history. That's also something very common within the States, but we don't get a lot of credit for the things that we've done, the labor that we have done that have really built a lot of Latin America to how it is today, and people being like, it's part of this rich culture. There's even on the music side of it, there's a lot of music that are from Afro Latinx people that is not really highlighted, and we had the drums, we had the rhythm, we brought it into play, and we mixed it with whatever Latin influence came, or Hispanic, I should say, influence came, or Portuguese influence came. So that's something that we also don't get credit for, even though we're the ones who like taught y'all how to dance, who taught y'all how to like move. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. And then another way is that a lot of people choose not to claim their Afro-Latinx identity. And that is a choice to some extent, but there's also this like self-hate sometimes that comes into play with that, of not wanting to claim that side, because it would seem easier to not claim that and just claim the Latin side of you. So I've seen this happen. There was someone, and this was even my bad for calling them out on this, because I shouldn't have assumed, but someone who was Dominican, and I was like, oh, you're African, or you're Afro-Dominicano. And they were like, no, I'm just Dominican. And I had to like process that. And for them, maybe it was just this like, no, this is just who I am. But there's also this like part of me that I'm like thinking, I'm like, okay, but like, is there a reason you don't claim that Afro side of yourself too? And that happens a lot. And that could be influence from family, influence from media, and basically all these influences that I talked about. So I talked about all that, this anti-Blackness portion. And now there's this not being Black enough, especially in America here. So having to even prove my Black identity. Who did I listen to? How is my mac and cheese made? How is what's the music that I listened to growing up? What's the culture that I grew up around? Do I know the slang? What do I use in my hair? Like who does my hair? All of these things that I have to do to prove my Blackness. Like, I can tell people I've been listening to like 112 and Boyz II Men and Aaliyah and all of them all my life, and they're like, okay, but like, what's your favorite song though? Like, because that matters, because if it's a radio hit, like, and it's just like, why does this matter? Like, you can see my hair, you can see my phenotype and all this too. So which is crazy. But there's also this like seen as not being part of the Black initiatives. And this is like honestly a really painful part of this. So with the Black Lives Matter movement, with anything that has to do with progressing the Black agenda and progressing Black people, there's this like certain part that you can get from people that it's like, okay, but we're not talking about you. You're not a part of this, which is painful, because like I still get called the N-word behind my back. People still look at me as a Black person first because of my phenotype, because of my skin color. So how are you going to tell me that this is not my fight too? Like, I am here to be part of this and to elevate this, and also talk to my community about this, or at least try to. Like, and so that's something that's really, really hard to really just like handle and deal with, because you get this whole side that's telling you like, this is not your fight, and you're like, you can't say that this is not my fight, because I'm living through this every day, and have been living through this every day, and will continue to live through this every day. And so will my family, so will my siblings, and if you choose to have children, so will my children. And so I am fighting for something that's much bigger than just me, but I am also having these experiences. And then another part of this is code switching, which this can go for a lot of other things, but how honestly, for me, I know that I code switch, which is hard for me to digest, and I'm trying to break that, because like I can camouflage myself into a lot of places, mainly because I've been told to, and that it'll be easier to maneuver, whatever that means. But do I talk differently with my Black side of the family than I talk to my Latinx side of the family? Which I know that I do. And some of it is language, even just like if I'm talking to them, and even if I'm talking in English to them and I can't come up with a word, I'll even say como se dice, and like come up with the word in English. Where am I? But like, there's no way I'm gonna call like my aunts and stuff, my Mexican aunts and stuff, sis. Like, that's not gonna happen. Like, I'm not gonna do that. And that's the code switching part, where I go to my Black side of the family, it's a little bit different. Where I even say yes sir, no ma'am, this different like type of mentality that I have to go in there. And so that's a lot to juggle for one person and one being, if we're being honest. And even that looks different when you're with your friends, and that looks different when you're with your colleagues. And so these like Afro Latinx people have to like balance a lot of things of being like, okay, what situation am I in? Should I have to code switch? Which we shouldn't have to. If I'm being honest, we should just be able to be ourselves, because white folks are themselves all the time. And so it's this like, who am I trying to appeal to right now? Which is a tough thing to fight like on your own. And even this like identity, like, am I enough? Am I Mexican enough? Am I Black enough? Like, if I'm not, then like I'm in the middle here, and I'm definitely not white. So like, where do I fit here? So that's what happens a lot with this. And like I said, a lot of this is very common with multiracial and multi-ethnic people as well, of having to juggle these different identities, and like not saying that they're part this and part that, but they're all of this and all of that, just in one being. So this kind of leads to the movements, protests, and rallies that are happening right now. So DACA and the Dreamers, defunding ICE and abolishing ICE, I should really say, because that's what actually should happen. We should abolish ICE. This whole controversy with the wall, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, and police brutality, and everything that happened with Breonna Taylor, and everything, or I should say everything that did not happen with Breonna Taylor, and everything that did not happen with Vanessa Guillen. And so Afro Latinx people are being affected by all of this. These are all of our fights. And so it's really challenging, because we're being affected left and right by people. When we see the kids in cages, we're like hurting on the inside, because we know that could have been us, or that's maybe a family member, or someone that we know, or someone that we knows that someone knows that someone knows, you know, like, you know. And so that's something that really hurts deep in a lot of ways. And people are like, oh, well, it's not your family. But like, but no, that is my family, because that easily, if I was not born into this family, I could have been born into that family, and that could have been me. And then the same thing with the Black Lives Matter movement. When people are like, oh, that's not you, or you don't know that person, like, no, but it could have been me, easily. Or it could have been my brother, or it could have been my father, or it could have been my sister, or whatever it might be. There's this like tie, like this like feeling in your head that like, am I next? And it's terrifying. And so that's why we're here, like, fighting all of these fights. And that's why we have a place in all of these fights, even though sometimes these fights do not recognize us as people, which is sad. It's sad in a lot of ways, because we're here to like help and be here with our family and be part of this movement, especially those of us who either are born in the United States here and like we have a claim here. We have like a stake here of actually being like, no, this is my home. And this is what I have to fight for. And so we're trying to use our power in the sense to really progress and move these movements forward, which is great, and it's painful all at the same time when you're hearing like, no, this isn't your fight. So this is just something to think about. Like, Afro Latinx people are dealing with all of this, and I haven't even touched on queer trans people of color, which is a whole other fight too. And we haven't, and there's a lot of homophobia within both cultures. There's a lot of transphobia within both cultures, and it's painful. And we're trying to fight for the people who can't have a say, or who they feel like they can't have a say, and who people are shutting them down. And so that's just something to recognize, that we are fighting all of these fights with our intersectional identities, and it gets tough, but for me, I wouldn't have it any other way, because with my Afro Latinx culture, I've been exposed to so many different cultures. I'm part of so many beautiful different types of cultures and beautiful different types of people. Listen, I have the best food ever on both sides of my family, and it's incredible. I don't like Thanksgiving. I call it Thanks-taking now, but the meal is lit. Birthday parties are incredible. Weddings, phenomenal. Like, the food is incredible. The music is off the charts. I get to dance bachata and then twerk the next second. Incredible. Amazing. And so it's so, I just love every part of it, and I love every part of my culture, and I wouldn't trade it any other way, because I've learned so much. And I think that's the thing, because I hold all these identities, I shouldn't have had to work so hard, but I have been able to extend myself to be able to learn about both sides of these cultures, and how I have played a part, and how my family has played a part within the United States. Ooh, what time is it? I'm talking a lot. Okay, so action items. So I know the first thing I put on here was vote. And I also want to recognize that not everyone can vote. Those who are under DACA, I know cannot vote. Those who, in Colorado, it's if you're in a prison, I believe, you cannot vote. But there are other places where if you just have a felony charge, you cannot vote at all. There's also mad voter suppression happening right now. So I recognize that, like, although voting can help, I also want to recognize that it is not feasible for everyone right now, especially right now, with the pandemic happening, with a certain someone in office, with all of these things happening in the world. And so I do want to recognize that. And if you have the right to exercise and you can vote, then I do encourage it. But if you cannot, I feel for you, and I'm gonna try to vote for you, which is really hard. It's really, really, really hard. And then work towards becoming an ally for Afro Latinx people. Suyan found this lovely picture of anatomy of an ally, which is, you have a mouth to speak out against injustice. You have a nose to sniff out implicit bias. You have eyes to identify privilege. You have ears to listen to the POC experience, or people of color experience. You have a heart to cultivate empathy or the oppressed. And back to the ears, I would even say, like, ears to listen to the Black experience right now, or the Afro Latinx experience right now. And then you have hands to take action and make a change. And so with this, make sure you are checking your own biases, and that you are checking your own privilege, and you're listening to the experiences of Afro Latinx people. Something that we all share here is that we have the privilege of being at the University of Colorado, Denver for you all, and was for me, which is something that not everyone can say. We had a right to an education. At least everyone here is striving towards either a degree or have 1 or 2 degrees. And then also support Black Lives Matter. support DACA, and support defunding and abolishing ICE, because that's also long overdue. And make sure you're also including Afro-Latinx people in your experiences when discussing Latinx initiatives. So make sure that we also have a seat at the table when these decisions are being made to improve the Latinx agenda, to progress the Latinx people within CU Denver, in organizations, in the community, whatever it might be, because we're here. We just may not be recognized as much. And we can also bring into light like a lot of other things, that intersectional identities that we hold, and that we may be leaving out a whole group of people that are our brothers and sisters. So those are some action items you can take. Okay, so that's like basically the end of my presentation part. So Swean, if you want to cut recording so we can go into this group discussion.
Sure, before we go ahead and do that, we want to definitely thank you so much, Alma, for being part of us and letting us fight this fight along with you. We celebrate Latinx Heritage Month, and this week we celebrated with LSS through our social media efforts and along with programming such as this to highlight the contributions of Afro-Latinx individuals and bring in our identity, because y'all are part of us too, and we are part of you as well. So we fight for you, we fight this fight along with you, and we thank you so much for joining us today. I will end the recording now.